Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to begin this event by acknowledging that I am joining you virtually at this moment from the Nunatak land. I apologize I cannot be there in Chicago with you at this moment, but I am very excited to share my work with you, and I will be here to take any questions afterwards. For the next 15 minutes, I will share with you my inspirations and my art making processes for the Sindhu project that is currently on view at the South Asia Institute. In school, I learned about the cradle of civilizations that were formed around rivers. Water is, after all, a symbol of life. One of the ancient civilizations that really captivated my attention at that time was Indus Valley, probably due to the fact that Indus Valley civilization emerged on the very land that I belonged to. In school, I also learned about Punjab and how it literally translates as five rivers. The word Panj means five and Ab means water. So Punjab is a province of five rivers that are derived from the Indus River. All new works created for the Sindhu project are hence comprised of 5 series. 4 of them are currently on view at the South Asia Institute, and I hope to finish the last series by the time this exhibition travels to India and Pakistan in November. Up until my grandmother was still with us few years back, stories of India's partition were a very common subject that was talked about every time I visited Lahore. Stories of displacement in the hopes that they would return back home one day were very common, but something that actually never really happened. This emotional journey and my own background of constantly moving from one country to another had shaped my artistic research. Making this work has been a form of understanding myself and reaching out for answers in order to heal. My art making process begins with a visit back home where I observe and gather information to be incorporated into my projects later on in my studio. For visual references, I rely on my documentations of these trips, along with information I can access remotely on the internet. Perhaps my attraction to homeland comes from the fact that I always visited it when I lived with my family abroad, but I would like to think that there is something deeper than that. I associate with my land as part of me, my past and my present. Visiting Texala and standing on the first site, Dharmarajika, made me think about the vastness of the land occupied by the Indus people, but also the vastness of the history that dates back thousands of years. It also made me think of what I could not see, as more digging may reveal the further past. This project is a self-reflection of experiencing the 5 historical sites that I visited in Texala. I'm using acrylic, a valuable material of our time, to address historical sites that are undervalued in my opinion. The large installation is inspired by the monastery surrounding the large stupa at the Dharmarajika site. It refers to the plan of the excavated monastery that encloses the stupa. The 3 different heights of the installation refers to the age of the patterns used in the work. The closest to us are the most recent. The process of laser cutting and etching mimics archaeology's subtractive methods of surveying, excavating, and screening. The project engages with not just the plans and architectural drawings of the excavated sites, but also the ancient decorative patterns that are still prevalent in this region. The titles of my projects have been carefully chosen to create a poetic ambiance. I have used the 2 verses from 2 different poems by Bulleh Shah for my installation to show regional unity. The verse from Bulleh Shah's primarily employed is called the Kafi, which is a style of Punjabi, Sindhi, and Saraiki poetry, which is not just used by the Sufis of Sindh and Punjab, but also by Sikh gurus. And I always found it really interesting that my parents did not want us to learn Punjabi language, but introduced us to Sufi poetry and Qawwali culture, which drew me even closer to all of it. My visual lexicon includes all that I believe belongs to my land, which is pottery, architecture, agriculture, and textiles. Few of the patterns used comes directly from the Ajrak designs. Ajrak is a unique form of block printing found mostly in Sindh. As an ancient craft, the history of Ajrak can be traced back to the civilizations of the Indus Valley. This vertical installation is inspired by the votive stupa found at Mohra Marado site in Texla. While in Chicago, this installation is displayed on two opposite sides of one pillar, and the plan is to show one side in Pakistan and the other side in India simultaneously. I had decided to keep true to the scale of this 13-foot tall stupa and had created my own interpretation of it using the same materials and techniques as the large floor installation. The votive stupa really stood out for me for its majestic existence. The abstract representation of the stupa attracted me to its visual representation and reminded me of an object that I had seen my grandmother use growing up. Surmedani is a coal holder. Koho or kajal is an ancient eye cosmetic traditionally made by grinding stibnite for similar purpose to charcoal used in mascara. I find it interesting that the Surmedani holds the coal while the stupa holds Buddha's remains, but they both visually look strikingly similar to me. Here are some more examples of what inspired the patterns in the vertical installation. Exploration of self and identity seems very similar to understanding these found artifacts. I noticed how, along with relief, lines were dominant in defining the patterns in these objects. Hence, use of line work has become an important tool for me to convey different patterns ranging in style and periods. My creative process for this series involves creating a digital sketch of an existing pattern by meticulously recording every line and every mark on the object, trying to stay as true to the found object and material as possible. Once finished, the digital sketch would go through another digital process where my hands did not touch the surface of the material. I relied purely on this digital translation by laser engraving into clear acrylic. And here you can see an example of this process where a design is being etched into the surface of acrylic. I am reminded of a phrase by Alice Albania in her book Empires of the Indus, where she critiques the Pakistani contemporary culture by saying that, and I quote, "As always in Pakistan, the old but interesting is being destroyed to make way for the shiny new," unquote. I see my process of recreating the patterns of the region on this contemporary medium as a way to preserve it in our time and to honor the ancestors and their creation without destroying or disturbing the original findings. Working with clear acrylic allowed for the effect that where I could physically make something that is visually minimal and it creates shadows. The absence of any color goes along with the faded colors of the historic architecture and artifacts. The projection of an image on multiple levels creates visual layers that reference the layers of time. Now I would like to take some time to talk about my works on paper for this project. While I was still faculty at Kent State University in Ohio, I had accidentally come across an atlas of India from 1981. The library at Kent State was getting rid of some archived materials and they did not see any use for anymore. And among many books and cartographic maps, I related to an atlas that I ended up using for the Texla series. In Texla series, I'm portraying the 5 sites that I visited in Texla. Dharmarajika was the first painting in this series, and it also happened to be the first site that I visited. I started the painting by carefully selecting the pages from the atlas. Afterwards, I would apply layers of tea stain. Once I had achieved the right tone for the surface, I would then transfer images of the patterns found in traditional miniature paintings before applying paint on the top surface. The oldest layer, hence, is pushed further back onto the substrate, while the closest to us is the most recently applied layer. Each individual painting comprises of 6 atlas pages that make up the whole floor map of a particular site, and the pages are individually framed for reconfiguration of this series in India and Pakistan, a theme that is consistent in all of my works. The 4th series in this project captures my fascination and observation of found relief objects that also includes architecture. Objects that embodied patterns that can be felt with the sense of touch. I wanted to capture this essence of these designs by using traditional Chinese rubbing technique. Almost 2,000 years ago, long before photography and digital scanning, Chinese scholars identified a way to share information with society at large through stone carvings set up in public locations. All that was needed to create portable reproductions in the form of rubbings was strong, pliable paper, natural glue, liquid ink, and soft, absorbent, silk-covered pads. Here I'm using materials that were available to me to record and share the patterns used in the votive stupa. The patterns used in the vertical installation were laser etched into the MDF board, which became my substrate to obtain the impressions of the designs. By applying a layer of water onto both sides of the paper, I was able to temporarily attach it to the MDF board as I went into the grooves of the pattern with a brush, digging into the paper, into the crevices of the design carefully. Ink was then applied with a homemade tool. The paper pressed into the carved out areas remained white, while the raised surface becomes black. The paper is then carefully removed from the surface, and this process is continued for more iterations of either the same pattern or to create new rubbings from new patterns. This brings me to the end of my presentation. It is a privilege to make art and to be able to share it with others, and I feel so very grateful to be in this position where I'm able to do both. Thank you so much for your time.